Hi everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Today we're diving into a book that hasn't even officially hit the shelves yet, but has already set off shockwaves across the Democratic Party and beyond. I'm talking about Kamala Harris's new memoir, 107 Days. For those who might not be following every twist and turn of American politics, here's the quick background. Harris, who served as vice president and later became the Democratic Party's presidential candidate in 2024, has written a 300-page memoir recounting her short-lived campaign. The title comes from the fact that her run lasted just 107 days. On the surface, that sounds like a campaign diary, a behind-the-scenes look at strategy, the highs and lows, maybe some reflections on what went wrong. But here's the twist. This book is full of raw emotions, direct criticisms, and some surprisingly personal jabs at her fellow Democrats. And because of that, even before its official release, it's already causing turmoil inside her party. So in this video, I want to break down what's actually in the book, why it's creating such a firestorm, how her fellow Democrats are reacting, and finally, share my own take on what this all means for Harris's political future. The memoir follows the timeline of her 2024 campaign. Harris writes about how she was thrust into the race after President Biden finally bowed out, how her team scrambled to build a campaign in record time, and how the effort ultimately fizzled. But the headlines aren't about the campaign logistics. They're about the way she talks about the people around her. She throws shade at Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who was widely rumored to be a top contender for her running mate. According to Harris, she considered him, but ultimately decided against it, with the blunt line that she didn't want to pick a gay man for the ticket. That's a pretty shocking admission in writing, especially in a party that prides itself on inclusivity. Buttigieg himself responded that he was surprised and thought Americans deserved more credit for being open-minded. She also writes about Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, another leading name who was seen as a possible VP pick. Harris claims Shapiro had too much ambition and even mocked him for supposedly measuring the curtains of the vice presidential residence before he was even selected. For a Jewish governor who is seen as a rising Democratic star, that kind of jab hits hard. And then there's Joe Biden. Harris doesn't hold back here either. She criticizes his decision to run again in 2024 as reckless, and describes moments that suggest his age and judgment were real concerns. At one point, she recounts him calling her before her debate with Trump, not to offer encouragement, but to pass along his brother's complaint that she wasn't loyal enough. She also includes anecdotes about his odd behavior. At the same time, she tries to soften those critiques by showing loyalty. She praises his command of policy details, and she writes about how she defended him when he was questioned by the special counsel. So it's a mix, criticism, but also some attempts at balance. Beyond that, the book has some surprisingly personal touches. Harris writes about her marriage, about moments of vulnerability. For example, when her husband Doug forgot to make birthday plans for her, leaving her hurt. She also reflects on the unique challenges of being a black woman in politics, especially one married to a Jewish man. She even writes that pairing herself with Buttigieg as a gay running mate would have been too risky, suggesting that multiple layers of identity politics might overwhelm voters. All of this makes the book feel less like a polished political memoir and more like a candid journal. And while that might appeal to readers who want honesty, it's also the exact reason the book is detonating like a bomb inside Democratic circles. Unsurprisingly, the reaction has been fierce. Josh Shapiro's team called her story about measuring curtains absurd. Shapiro himself went on a podcast and hit back, questioning why Harris never spoke up earlier about Biden being unfit to run. He basically accused her of rewriting history to save face. Pete Buttigieg also didn't let it slide. He expressed disappointment, saying leaders should trust Americans to judge candidates on their merits, rather than assuming voters won't accept a gay man on the ticket. And that's just the beginning. Politico reports that over 15 Democratic strategists and insiders they interviewed are stunned by the book. Words like grenade and mess come up a lot. David Axelrod, a senior advisor to Barack Obama, put it bluntly, "If there's a strategy here, it's a bad one." He said the book is full of grievances and blame shifting, and that doesn't serve any political purpose. Inside the Democratic Party, many people are asking, what was she thinking? Some believe this is Harris burning bridges on her way out, a kind of farewell letter to politics. Others think she's trying to reset her image, presenting herself as more authentic, more outspoken, and more relatable, perhaps even positioning herself for another run down the road. Now, you might be asking, why does one politician's memoir matter so much? Don't we see books like this all the time? The difference here is timing and tone. Harris isn't some retired figure writing her reflections decades later. She was the party's standard bearer less than a year ago, and her party is still licking its wounds from back-to-back losses to Donald Trump. Most Democrats don't want to reopen that painful chapter. They'd rather look forward, regroup, and focus on 2028. But Harris's book drags everyone back into the blame game. Who said what? Who wanted which role? Who was ambitious? Who was reckless? It also exposes just how fractured the party is. Instead of showing unity after a tough defeat, Harris is highlighting divisions, and her colleagues are firing back publicly. For a party that needs to rebuild trust with voters, this isn't helpful. And let's be honest, Republicans are watching all of this with glee. For them, Harris's book is a gift, confirmation that Democrats are divided and bitter. To be fair, though, there are some positives here. For years, critics said Harris came across as stiff, overly rehearsed, and too cautious. She often stuck to safe talking points and avoided saying anything that might backfire. That made her seem less authentic, less relatable. This book completely flips that script. Here, she's raw, emotional, and brutally honest. She admits mistakes. She shares awkward personal details. She vents about colleagues. In a strange way, that kind of vulnerability could make her more appealing to some people who are turned off by her robotic public persona. Supporters argue this book is Harris reclaiming her story. Instead of letting pundits and rivals define her legacy, she's telling her version. And maybe, just maybe, being brutally honest now clears the air for her to make a comeback later. But the risks outweigh the benefits. By criticizing Buttigieg and Shapiro, she's alienated two of the party's brightest rising stars, both of whom could be key players in 2028. By reopening questions about Biden, she's irritating his loyalists who still have influence. By airing internal grievances, she's reminding everyone of the chaos and dysfunction that plagued the 2024 campaign. Even some of her supporters admit parts of the book are cringeworthy. Like when she complained about Doug forgetting her birthday plans. It's personal, sure, but does it belong in a political memoir? Or when she framed her VP selection dilemma around identity politics in such blunt terms. It sounds calculating, not inspiring. In short, the book may win her some points for honesty, but it costs her dearly in terms of relationships and strategy. So how do I see it? I think 107 Days reads less like the launchpad for a comeback and more like a cathartic release. Harris letting it all out after a brutal campaign and disappointing loss. It's almost therapeutic writing, but not necessarily strategic politics. If her goal is to stay in the game and maybe run again, this book makes that harder. Every rival in the Democratic Party now has ammunition to use against her. Every critical passage will be quoted back at her in debates and interviews. And voters may wonder, if she can't keep her team united, how could she unite the country? But if her goal is to close this chapter of her life, then the book makes more sense. It's her version of events, her way of saying, here's what really happened, here's what I saw, here's what I felt. In that sense, it could be her farewell to frontline politics. Of course, politics is unpredictable. We've seen politicians come back from worse. But as it stands, I'd say this book makes Harris's path forward much more complicated. So that's where things stand. Kamala Harris's memoir, 107 Days, hasn't even been officially released, and already it's stirred up a storm inside the Democratic Party. It's raw, it's emotional, it's honest, but it's also divisive, risky, and politically costly. The big question now is this Harris's goodbye, or is it her attempt to rebrand herself for a future run? What do you think? Is Harris burning bridges or clearing the air for a comeback? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We cover political stories like this all the time, cutting through the noise to give you a deeper look at what's really going on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.